Today on a special crossover event, well, it was the most anticipated matchup of the two best teams in baseball this week. Well, kidding, of course. The battle for the basement in the NL. It was all Miami as the Rockies now find themselves in the bottom.
You are Locked On Rockies, your daily Colorado Rockies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Rock on Rockies fans and Marlins fans, welcome into a special crossover episode here on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm Paul Holden, host of the Locked On Rockies podcast, joined by the one, the only Peter Pratt of the Locked On Marlins podcast. We're bringing you your daily Colorado Rockies and Miami Marlins talk right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, where you can find your team every day. If your team is the Colorado Rockies or the Miami Marlins, you're in the right spot because that's what we do around here. Find us on your favorite streaming services and on the Locked On Rockies and Locked On Marlins YouTube channel. Today's episode is brought to you by Monopoly Go. If you have a competitive side and you love Monopoly, well, you got to check out Monopoly Go, the mobile hit on classic Monopoly. Join your friends and download Monopoly Go now, free on the App Store or Google Play. Peter, let's dive into it. It was a series, I think, for both of these teams looking to get right. I think both of these teams were looking at this as an opportunity. Weak team. Let's turn things around. And for one, Miami, they were able to do it. What stuck out to you? I mean, it wasn't necessarily the prettiest series of baseball for either of these teams, but you got to be happy with the sweep, especially after a 7-run skid or a 7-game skid.
Yeah, for sure. The outcome ended up being what you're looking for, right? To your point, though, if you dive into like the body of work, let's say over those 3 games, it's fair to say the sweep probably was a little bit lopsided in some ways, between these teams. I don't think there was a ton between them. In the reality, you kind of look at particularly that game 1 start, right? Sixto's, in a 5-run hole in the first, and you're thinking this is going to be a tough one for the Marlins. So listen, I think it flattered the Marlins getting the sweep. I think a bounce of the ball here and there. This was a Rockies series win, to be honest with you. I think the game 2, I think, was like vintage Marlins baseball, to be honest with you. A starter going deep into the game, lean on your pitching, your bullpen kind of comes in and you scratch a few runs. Like, that's Marlins baseball. It ain't the sexiest thing, but that's like how they're built. Game 1 and game 3, maybe not for the purists, but we'll take the wins. The funny thing is, like, post-game, a walk-off is always a fun moment, right? But, at home and you walk them off. And Jesus Sanchez, who delivers the walk-off hit, he's getting very excited. He's a very excitable character in general. He's had a very interesting few days, I would say, after getting obviously benched as well for a misplay. But Jesus Sanchez declares after the walk-off that Miami is back.
There you go. You got to love that.
This is it, baby. I mean, considering, okay, it's a sweep. It's a 3-game sweep. The Marlins now 9-24. 15 games under 500. Jesus Sanchez declares them that they're back. So, bold takes. And listen, for me, this was almost the Jacob Stallings series, to be honest with you. When I look back, like this, almost, again, things would have bounced a different way. We'd have been reflecting on Jacob Stallings, the best catcher in. I mean, we still could reflect on that, to be honest, Paul. Like, Jacob Stallings, baby, what's going on?
I mean, to be totally honest, a guy that catcher's an interesting position for the Rockies, and a guy that has quite the backstory. It's been tough with some plays at the plate for Rockies catching this year, but Stallings got all of that pitch. I mean, it's nice. But when you're talking Rockies, that's it. There's your flash of offense. That's it. I mean, and when you really break it down, in the 2 games where the Rockies scored more than 1 run, in game 2, they were pretty much dominated the entire game. But it's one big flash. Bam! Whoa, 5 runs. Wow, look at that. We come on the road in Miami where the Rockies historically struggle. I mean, you couldn't have asked for a better start. But what happens? Zeros across the board, strikeouts. Yeah. I mean, in the finale, the Rockies strike out 16 times. I mean, it doesn't matter.
Crazy.
I mean, when you strike out at the rate that the Rockies do, which is they've struck out the second most in baseball, and they've also thrown the least amount of strikeouts in baseball as a pitching staff, it's just broken. You just can't drum up any sort of offense. And what's frustrating is a 5-run lead's got to be enough. And then the bullpen comes in and it's walks, and Ryan Feltner was throwing a Maddox until he got removed on that game one on Friday, which would have been mind blowing. And so the Rockies and I think you could probably relate to this, Peter, this year have never been able to string things together. It's here's a little momentum, here's a big inning, but then nothing, goose eggs, flat, nothing. And that's just not enough. I mean, it should be enough. 5 runs in the 9th should be enough, but that hasn't been the case for the Rockies. So until they start doing the little things right, which again, both of these teams struggled with in this series, they're not going to, they will continue to be in this situation. But I do got to ask, they might not be back yet. Sweep. This is how you start working your way out of it. I think obviously the hole that the Rockies and the Marlins have dug at the beginning of the season is a deep one. What do you really think that this can mean for the Marlins? Is it just a 3-gamer, we'll take it anyway, and it can build from there? What takeaways do you have for the Marlins after this series?
Yeah, I think the interesting bit is when you listen post game to like Skip Schumacher speaking, and I listen to every post game presser. And yesterday, when I listened to Skip talking, even though the hole the Marlins are in, Skip Schumacher he's trying everything to win games on that day. Like Skip is trying to manage his ass off day in, day out. So he's still all in. Like he's a lame duck manager at this point. You know, there's various issues around that. You know, this is very likely Skip Schumacher's last year. To be honest with you, I'd be surprised if he makes it through the season. We'll wait to see how that goes, but that's another story for another day. But, you know, he's still all in. He's managing his ass off, and he needs to because he's in contract year effectively, right, as a manager. Right. So it's all gas from him, which I think in some ways helps at this point. Like, it's still pedal to the metal. You know, we've seen discipline being handed out to Jesus Sanchez earlier in the season because of a missed play, and he just was a lazy throw and, et cetera. So, you know, listen, it's a 3-game sweep. However, preceding this is a 4-game sweep by the Nats on the road in Miami. And so, listen, like, it's hard to get super excited about a Marlins series, which frankly could have gone the other way. If we look at it, like, you know, sometimes it's the bounce of the ball. Sometimes, you know, it's your series and things just come together. But yeah, I look at this roster and I think there's more talent than the record shows. But as the saying goes, your record's your record, and it kind of is what it is. And the Marlins have their own problems. You know, you're talking about a 5-run inning. The Marlins in that Nats series, you know, they were 7-0 up, in the second inning. And by the 5th inning, they were already 9-7 down. You know, and crazy. To your the word you mentioned in that question then was, or in the previous piece, was the fundamentals. And not doing the fundamentals. I look at the Rockies, they're not doing them, and neither are the Marlins. Both of these clubs in the cellar. And I think that's it, right? Neither club is playing clean baseball often enough. And to your point, if you're striking out 16 times in a single game, it's way too much. Like, that's unsustainable for anyone.
Especially when, for Rockies fans, we were told we're working on strikeouts because they were the worst team at striking out last year. And it's just the thing where you're talking about Skip. What I do appreciate, even with the, you know, for those that aren't familiar, Skip Schumacher basically said, I don't know if I'm going to be here. And there's a whole bunch, you know, if you know, the Marlins front office stuff is just as frustrating really as Rockies fans can relate to when it comes to front office stuff. But I don't see the fire from Bud Black. I don't know how Bud Black isn't getting more fired up on some of these. Bud Black should have been ejected in this series. And I say that not as a thing, but the umpiring was mostly atrocious in certain instances, in key moments there. The Rockies, you can't just blame it on that, but it's like, I'm waiting for Bud Black to do, they held a meeting after the game, but whatever. I mean, a little too late. I'm waiting for Rockies coaching, Rockies management to change something, because the Rockies don't only look lifeless out there and without a pulse, they look underprepared. I mean, 16 strikeouts. If you're striking out 16 times in a game, your game plan is not working. Your approach, your philosophy, your preparation going into this game. And it's Miami. What is Miami known for literally their entire existence? Great pitching. Going into Miami, you know that they have, even with all the injuries, I would take any one of those starters in the Marlins rotation and put them happily in the front half of the Rockies rotation this year. Yeah. So when I see the Rockies in this series, especially, I see a team that is not one. I'm with you too. I see a roster that has more potential, that has more talent. I said as much going from the offseason, but I see a team that's underprepared, and that's why they have set history. Marlins fans might not have been tracking this because they've been distracted themselves, but the Rockies have now trailed in every single game this season. Not a single point this season have the Rockies never held the lead and held it the entire time. That is a major league record. They beat a team from 1910.
That's unbelievable.
1910. So, you know, when you constantly are playing from behind, when you're constantly down in the count, 0-2, 0-1, you're always digging yourself out of a hole, and you can't get anything going. And at least when I hear, or when I think of Skip Schumacher, I think of a manager that's gonna make something happen. For me, I'm kind of over the Buddy Black. I don't need a chummy guy right now. I need a guy that's going to inspire this team. And right now, Bud Black is not doing that for his team. And I'm someone that hasn't been big on the fire Bud Black train. Some people have been, because my perception of manager is a little weird. But when your team is constantly going out there and looks underprepared, mixed with the fact that this is a front office from the Rockies that we know that doesn't value analytics, doesn't buy into the new era of baseball, and comments made by the Rockies owner that says he loves the people that he has, the loyalty that he has from his crew, you can't really get excited or expect anything to change. Because listen, Peter, you've come from a team that moves on from managers. Would Miami stick with Skip if they were continuing, if they were setting a major league record, if instead of the Marlins, I think Skip Schumacher obviously gets this too from last year, making the playoffs. The Rockies had their worst season in franchise history last year, and then they follow it up with this month. And so I'm just questioning, like, when would you make a change? I mean, you'd have to make a change at that point.
Yeah, what's the breaking point, right? Like, when do you pull the pin on this? Experiment's probably the wrong phrase, but when do you pull the pin on this and just kind of call out and say, listen, are we just going to continue to do the same things over and over and over again? And the definition of insanity, right? So when do you pull it, I guess? And, you know, no fundamentals, no improvement in the area that we're calling out. To your point, if they're coming out and saying, listen, we're going to focus in and reducing the strikeouts, we're looking to get, and the Marlins had their problems with that too a few years ago. And the funny thing was, they then went down from a player acquisition perspective. They went down contact heavy. Next thing is Luis Arias is in town. They all of a sudden were like, okay, we can't strike out at the rate we are anymore. We're going to make a change in terms of how we go about the coaching staff, but equally the types of players that we build our roster around. Next thing is Arias is in. Next thing is, you know, contact heavy guys. It wasn't just bombs or strikeout crew, which was there historically. So something's got to change, Paul. And that's the point, right? You just can't continue forever. Yeah, because it's not getting better. And, you know, in terms of sticking with managers, I'd say it's a really interesting topic, right? But it depends where you're at and what the strategy is and what the goals are of the organization. Because Don Mattingly was with the Marlins through that rebuild phase, and they stuck with Don. But, you know, you get to 2020, the COVID year, when the Marlins had their kind of miracle run where they had no roster because everyone was on the COVID IL. It was like such a great moment for Don to be able to kind of bring that club through. And he saw fruits of all that effort in some ways, but then quickly it turned around and, you know, the wheels fell off quickly in 2021. So, you know, I'm the type of guy that likes to make changes if things are clearly not working. And it sounds like maybe that is the direction your head's at too.
Yeah, you know, I mean, it is, the Rockies haven't really, like, they've admitted it, but they haven't. They really hate the word rebuild. And this year is supposed to be a rebuild, but I saw an A's team last year not do what the Rockies are doing right now. Again, when you are setting records that no one else has done, rebuild or not, that's a problem. Hey, we're a little late to get to a break. We got more to break down here, including a simple question, but one I think that has a lot of depth and especially relates to these two teams. We're going to get to that in just a moment. But before we do that, got to tell you about the folks that help make this show possible, and that includes FanDuel. I mean, it is prime sports time right now, folks. You got basketball playoffs, you got hockey playoffs, you got golf, you got baseball, you got everything going on. And tennis is going on right now as well, right? Tennis is lots of tennis.
You know it.
Exactly. So There is so much to bet on right now in the world of sports, and FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We are also brought to you by our friends at Monopoly Go. All right, timeout here. We got to pause to talk more about Monopoly Go. I know what you're saying, flag on the play. You already talked about that, but there is just so much good stuff in this game. In Monopoly Go, you can team up with friends for time tournaments where you work together to build up each other's boards. The more you win together, the more awesome prizes you unlock, and there's so much to get. Unique stickers you can trade with friends to complete albums for big prizes. Cool new playing pieces to travel the boards with, hilarious emojis for taunting your friends when you smash their buildings or heist their vaults. Plus, Monopoly Go feels new and exciting every day with constantly changing tournaments and challenges. A ton include their own mini games like digging for treasure or robot pachinko. There's always new timed events that help you win big, like massive multipliers or rent frenzies. Go download Monopoly Go free on the Google Play or App Store. Game on. Back here on the Locked On Rockies and Locked On Marlins podcast. Hey, you can get all your play-by-play action of the Rockies and the Marlins on SiriusXM. Just search Colorado Rockies or Miami Marlins, and you will be taken where you need to go, and you can always check it out. Peter, it's a question, obviously, that has a simple answer here. You obviously want both, but when you're thinking about things, would you rather have an elite offense or an elite defense? And I think it really does depend on where you play. For the Rockies, defense is focusing specifically on pitching, I should say. You've watched a lot of elite pitching, and you've watched a lot of not great offense when it comes to Miami. And in the past with the Rockies, we've watched not a lot of great pitching with some great offenses. The Rockies have kind of been bad on both of those accounts since the playoff years. And speaking honestly, all the trends are down since they made the playoffs. But I'm curious, do you have a preference as a team, as someone that watches a pitching focused team? Do you think that there are flaws in that in that philosophy?
Yeah, I think we go back to last season where the Marlins, ended up being the 5 seed in the NL. And I look at the type of, how they made that run. It was based around their pitching staff, right? They were, I think, the lowest scoring offense in the NL, even though they made the postseason. And what the pitching gives you is you're in every game, and anything can happen. Last year, everything did happen late in those games. So what I'd say is, if you love heart attack type baseball as a fan, then you'll love watching an elite pitching staff because you're in every game. There's comebacks that can happen. You gotta just lean so heavily on your staff, and that's what we saw. Equally, the bullpen. That's when I look at the difference between 2024 Marlins and 2023 Marlins, it's a vast difference in what their records are like. Comes down to that leverage pen. Last year, they just couldn't lose a game. They were just elite. If the game was on the line, pen was immense. 2024. They just can't win a game, or they haven't been thus far. And it's such the volatility and variance in bullpens is honestly, it's mind blowing. But to go back to the question, I loved watching the Marlins and their pitching staff and the way they go about things, and it keeps you in every game. So let's call that out. What I would say, though, is I would absolutely love for the Marlins to find some stud hitters to just build around, because it feels like since the rebuild, the Jeter rebuild, when, Stanton, Yelich, Ozuna, Realmuto, everyone was moved, we've been starved of offensive talent in that period. We've had 2 playoff appearances, but the offenses have still been way below par. So it shows you can win games and you can get into the postseason using that methodology. But overall, as fans, I like to see runs. I like to see action. And the game, the rules, everything that's changing in the game is designed to create more runs and more action. That's what the game wants to see. And I know, listen, there's going to be a bit of a rebuild, a retool, whatever, The Marlins won't use that phrase either. I know the Rockies aren't using that phrase, rebuild, because it's kind of
it's an icky word. I mean, they don't. Exactly. It's going to impact the fans. It's like, well, the fans are watching what's going on, right?
We know. Exactly. We know. And so it's going to be really interesting to see how the Marlins approach it. What I would say, and you've seen it this series, where a guy like Rosario Munoz comes up, he ends up twirling a gem in game 2 in this series, and you think, who is this dude? He's acquired for cash considerations this offseason. It's the thing the Marlins have proved time and again, that they can turn peripheral guys into more than serviceable arms at the big league level. And so as an organization, I want to see them take that step offensively. I want to get them, let's find a way to get the offensive dudes drafted, traded for, developed, and into this offense to supercharge it, because it needs both. To your point, it needs both. But I'm confident that the Marlins have an ability to create pitching, whereas offense, it needs a bit of a ground up rethink, I think, in terms of how they've gone about it historically. And I think that's where Peter Bendix is going to focus his time. And that's going to be the priority: is can we get the hitting, development right to make this sustainable? I think so. It's a long-winded answer. I want both. I like pitching. I also crave offense as well. What about you?
I think that's really the best way to look at it. I mean, craving offense. I mean, I crave offense because that's the people say Coors Field. Doesn't matter. No, if you can't hit the ball, it doesn't matter. So for me right now, I truly think that the Rockies, the secret to the Rockies' success is elite offense. I think if you're going to be the Rockies, you're going to have to be okay with, more often than not, you win the 8-7. When you're winning the 8-7 ball game. You're winning the ridiculous, weird, wacky games, because if I have an offense that can go up against any rotation and hit off of them, I feel great. I feel like the Rockies can win the shootouts, especially when those teams have to come to Coors Field and play there. But this team has never been able to consistently hit on the road. They've never, and people, the guys of Coors Field makes everyone think the Rockies are good on offense. When if you look, the Rockies have been a bottom tier offense for years now. It's all stuck in the mud. So in reality, I think the best thing for the Rockies is great offense with good enough pitching. That's how they made it to the playoffs. Why were they so good and made it in back-to-back years? Is because their rotation was strong enough with German Marquez, John Gray, Kyle Freeland, Antonio Senzatella at the top of their game, mixed with the fact that your offense had DJ LeMahieu, Trevor Story, Nolan Arenado. I mean, and that was just in the infield, mixed with the fact that Charlie Blackmon was playing at an all-star level at that time. If the Rockies were able to just find a first baseman or catcher during those times and add to that offense, it would be a completely different story. So as much as I want great pitching, I would love for the Rockies to have someone that go out there and do it. I think the best way for success for the Rockies is good pitching, good enough pitching with great offense, because I think the true secret is you come to Coors Field, it doesn't matter if you're Clayton Kershaw or Sixto Sanchez. Like, if you're coming to Coors Field, it's got to be a dangerous place to play. But it's only dangerous for Rockies pitching right now, because they aren't because the Rockies aren't scoring, and the Rockies pitchers, even with some of the quality starts, I believe now with Feltner's start, I believe the Rockies are now like 0-7 on quality starts from their pitchers. And you can't be wasting that. You can't. 7 quality starts from a Rockies pitching staff that's considered to be the worst in baseball. You can't afford those type of games. So I think the deep down, like you said, both. But I'm an offense guy. I was a DH first base in high school. I like offense. Hit the hell out of the ball, please, because what's so degrading right now about watching the Rockies, and especially in game 3, they had a lot of opportunities. Bases loaded, runners in scoring position, no outs, back-to-back Ks.
I know.
On 3 pitches? Like,
no way.
Come on. Like, or to start the game today, the Rockies go have Brenton Doyle and Ezekiel Tovar go down on 7 pitches to start the game today. Like, come on. And these are young guys, Brenton Doyle and Ezekiel Tovar, but still, the Rockies just, I tweeted this out. You throw a curveball, you throw some off speed, 2 strikes, it's a swing and a miss, 95% clip. So the answer has to be a lot more, but I think for each team, it's dependent here on what happens for pitching and offense. Because I think that's another why I am jealous of Arizona is the Rockies have played Arizona now twice this season. And the broadcasts have talked about how Arizona really bought into thinking about their ballpark, thinking about what works in Arizona, what works here. And they bought into that. And now, again, they're going to be a wild card team. That's who they are. But again, get them into the postseason and just let them ride. Let them see what happens, because I think that they're a better team this year than last year. And it's just, so it's kind of hard with the Rockies. You try to remind yourself of rebuild, but when I'm watching this team, it looks worse than other rebuilding teams. Like I mentioned, it's just the Rockies are doing things this year that other rebuilding teams have never done. And man, it's just been a frustrating thing. Let's take a quick break here, and then we'll wrap up our final thoughts on this series and looking ahead for these two teams coming up here on today's episode of Locked On Rockies and Locked On Marlins. Before we do that, though, got to tell you about our friends at PrizePicks. They help make this show possible, and they are the number one spot for daily fantasy sports with more than 3 million members. It's the easiest and most exciting way to get in on the action on all your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats and watch the winning roll in. It could be home runs, it could be hits, it could be strikeouts, it could be 3-pointers, it could be rebounds. You name it, PrizePicks has it, and you can win big during the playoffs. You can win up to 100 times your money on PrizePicks as you and the world's best players take the game to a new level during the basketball postseason. You can get quick withdrawals, easy gameplay, and an enormous selection of players and stat types are what make PrizePicks the number one fantasy sports app. You can download the app today, the PrizePicks app today, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for a first deposit match up to $100. That's a first deposit match up to $100 when you use the promo code Locked On the PrizePicks app. PrizePicks, pick more, pick less. It's that easy. Peter Pratt, Paul Holden here, bringing you your Rockies Marlins talk, recapping a series. We'll just call it that because again, it was something. Man, it was just kind of ugly, and I don't know if you saw much of this, but the umpiring wasn't that great. But we'll see where the teams go from here. What do you think the Marlins, what's the schedule looking like ahead for these guys? Do you think that this is something that can build momentum? Hey, even if they're not totally back, it's got to feel good to see your players with a big smile on their face and confidence in their post-game pressers.
Oh, for sure. And I'll tell you, it's nice to see my own face doing these podcasts with a smile on my face because, man, it has been brutal. And, you end up down a rabbit hole all the time talking about, what's going on with Peter Bendix and do we trust this front office and, what's going on? It's just nice to win a couple of games, like just get some momentum and remind you of why you enjoy baseball.
Yeah.
It hasn't been pretty this series, no doubt, but it's just fun to piece a few wins together. The A's, we travel out to play the A's now. So, we had this little stretch where it was like, okay, 4 games against the Nats, 3 against the Rockies, 2 against the A's. Can you piece it together? All of a sudden, can you reboot the season? Well, unfortunately, you get swept at home in a 4-game series against the Nats. So the answer to that was no. But, the A's on deck. Then we got the Dodgers, Phillies after that. So it's going to be a tough week. But listen, we've started May much better than we started March and April. So that feels like a success. For the Marlins generally, the outlook now, we're starting to get some of the starting pitching back. I think when I look back to what happened, what went wrong to start the year, the 0-9 start. I mean, again, the Rockies, it sounds like, have had already still historic with their, falling behind in every game. The Marlins were pretty much historic too with the start of the year, 0-9 to get it going. And, they've had their worst ever franchise start. So, what went wrong? Unfortunately, a slew of injuries just happened right at the back end of spring for the rotation. Right. And it just, heads were scrambled. I think just no one knew. Everyone was just panicking. And they lost games they should have won. And next thing is, it just snowballs, right? And you're 0-9. And you're kind of looking around going, it's the first week of the year.
Right.
But is the year cooked? Thinking,
right.
Are we cooked?
Yeah.
And I think there was a bit of that going on. And I think maybe now they've dusted themselves off a touch. Some of the guys are back. And we'll probably see like a slightly sub 500 club the next, the way out. They'll end up winning. What's that equate to? High 60s in terms of wins. They're going to sell some pieces. We'll wait to see what that looks like. But overall, it's clearly uninspiring as a fan coming off a postseason run.
Right.
And, a slow start gives the leverage to the front office to make these moves. And so everyone's just kind of sitting, waiting. What's going to happen? What's going to happen? We're going to see how Peter Bendix and the analytics guys can spin this. So, interesting. What about the Rockies? Tell me what the outlook looks like for the Rockies. When are they going to snap this streak as well, Paul?
You hope it's this weekend against Pittsburgh, and you hope it was game 1 of this series when you're leading all the way up until the 9th. I don't know at this point, to be totally honest. I mean, it is crazy until this team puts together a full ball game. I got no confidence that they can beat anybody. I mean, if it wasn't for the White Sox, they would be the worst team in baseball. And like you mentioned, they play the Pirates here coming up, and then they haven't played the Dodgers yet. They still have to play in the really loaded NL West. It's going to be a tough slog here. I think though that what might happen, and if you can't continue at this pace, I don't think it'll be that crazy if Ryan McMahon is not a member of the Colorado Rockies at the trade deadline. I think the Marlins, I think the Mariners, these teams with good pitchers would love Ryan McMahon, elite Gold Glove third base, and a guy that can get you 20, be a 2020 guy, and not 2020 with stolen bases, but a guy that can hit you 20 bombs, and a guy that's really shown that his swing is better this year. I think the Rockies are going to have to make some tough decisions about some key veteran players while giving their young guys time here. But the Ryan McMahons, the Brendan Rodgers, the Elias Diaz's, those question marks are, and what you do with them, they're certainly going to be a factor when you come to the middle. As performance, though, I don't know, man. This team, they need to go on a run. Another thing I haven't mentioned, this team hasn't won back-to-back ball games since September of last year. I mean, so I mean, it's not just winning a game, it's winning two. It's something they haven't done. So the Rockies have a long way to go to really even just start making it feel like they're making progress in this rebuild. I thought the Rockies were going to be better this year. You know, I was pretty high on it, but it's going to take a lot for them to be a better team than they were last year here after the start that they've had. But we'll see. The Pirates have been struggling. Pirates are an interesting team. So again, just like you're looking at the Marlins series here, if you're the Rockies, you got another opportunity, because until this series against Miami, it was all playoff teams to start the season. And everybody that they have played is either made the playoffs last year or considered to be a playoff team this year, and the Rockies weren't ready for that. So
that's it. I know we're low on time, but let me just ask you one final one, because there's an intertwining here between our organizations. There was heavy rumors around Eddie Cabrera, potentially being traded to the Rockies at one point. I think last season, obviously Edward Cabrera going today. Just interested to get your take on, how you view him as a pitcher, what kind of job or role he could have played in this Rockies rotation. Do you wish something maybe could have happened there with Edward Cabrera?
I think the Rockies are long overdue for trading for some of these pitchers from elite places like Miami and like I mentioned, Seattle, just because of my connection here. But then I worry what happens when they come to Colorado. Are they? But you have to be willing to take that risk. And I think last year the price was like Brendan Rodgers or something like that.
Yeah, it was.
Brendan Rodgers hasn't. I love Brendan Rodgers as like when he's playing great. He is an incredibly enjoyable player to watch. But he has not lived up to his selection. He hasn't stayed healthy. And I think last year, with the fact that the Rockies, one of their top prospects is a second baseman, I think you got to be in a situation where if you can make that a similar deal, I say you go for it, because I want the Rockies to have somebody that can go out there and strike people out. I want somebody that has the ability to get strikeouts, because the Rockies desperately need that. And for Cabrera here now in 3 starts, he's got, what is this? I'm doing some quick math, 21 strikeouts now in his appearances. I would love that, because here's my philosophy too on Coors Field. You want to know how you negate the Coors Field stuff? Make it so people can't hit the ball. So if you have a guy that can go and just pipe you 100 miles an hour on the hands, it's going to be some sort of successful. Because right now it's weak, get guys to hit for contact, get weak ground balls, all that type of stuff. And it works when it's not your entire rotation. And especially when you have a rotation and bullpen that can't hit their spots. Walks are a huge problem with the Rockies. So I think that's another thing that might be kind of a hesitation for a Cabrera is control. But
I would say,
I think that's, I don't think the Rockies help the control because they have an issue working with their own guys. And that's also what's frustrating about management. Bud Black's supposed to be a pitcher-focused manager, and he had a great rotation in the playoff years. But since the playoff years, he has not been able to rebuild. And same with the Rockies at getting people. Now, there's some really interesting arms in AA, single A level right now. But that's AA, single A level. That doesn't help you in the next 2 years. So I think at last year, since the Rockies made so many moves and they were already on the trajectory, I think they could have gone even bigger, because if they would have fully bought into the rebuild and moved McMahon and Rodgers, you could have really gotten some good arms. And now Rodgers, slow start. How much another slow start and mixed with other things, how valuable will he be at this deadline? And Rodgers last year was also with that shoulder injury too, so he was out most of last season too. So I would be fine with it, because I think making a trade with these elite pitching organizations, makes sense. But then when you get them into your organization, what are you doing for them then? Because I think the Rockies are just underprepared compared to the rest of baseball there. Peter, we could talk for hours more here, but we got to wrap things up here on today's episode. Where can people go to make sure they're up to date with all things Marlins, all things you?
You know it, and great episode by the way. One thing I didn't mention on the intro, I love the Locked On Rockies intro music, by the
Thank
way.
you.
That is
Appreciate
sexy.
it.
That is sexy, no doubt. I need to speak to my producer and get a revamp. But yeah, for everyone listening, doesn't have the graphics to help them. I'm primarily a Twitter guy, or X. If that's how you call that app. So hit me up at Miami Marlins _UK. And for those listening, the Rockies fans in particular, going, what the hell is that accent? Yes, it is a UK accent. I'm based in Leeds in England. That's the only guy they could find to host Locked On Marlins. There's only one guy that would say yes, and he's in England. But yeah, of course, daily show as well, like your show, Locked On Marlins. And if you love pain and rebuilds, then join me this year. It's going to be a lot of fun.
Hey, why not double up on the rebuilds? It's gonna be tons of fun. And I got to give shout outs to Peter and there is a really dedicated UK Europe baseball community out there, and I really want to shout out to them. We have a France Rockies profile that's really, really bought in, which is always cool to see. I'm Paul Holden. You can find me Locked On Rockies, LO Rockies on Twitter. Paul Holden 33 if you care about video games. That's usually what I'm talking about there. But folks, until next time, this is Paul Holden saying so long for the Locked On Rockies and Locked On Marlins podcast.